In this video, we're talking about two young women who found themselves in a deadly situation, which should have been one of the best traveling trips of their lives, and instead, they fell victim to a gruesome tragedy, stopping their fun in its tracks. In 2014, two Dutch best friends named Chris and Lisanne, who were about 21 and 22 at the time, were planning a big trip for months, and they were also figuring to spend a few months on this trip with pretty sophisticated and ambitious goals ahead of them. During this entire trip to a foreign part of the world for them, they would use this time and really make a difference as volunteers studying abroad at a local school, really taking advantage of this new experience and this once-in-a-lifetime journey. The entire situation was really uncharted territory for them, and throughout their new hiking endeavors, they would be making their way through the volcano called Baru in Boquete, Panama. So they set off on their journey together, and part of their main bucket list items to check off was a great hike through the trail of El Pianista on this volcanic mountain range. And this wasn't going to be a short 20-minute type of exercise thing for these two young women either. They were planning on scaling this trail over a 4-hour period, and they went prepared. They took backpacks which had clothes, water, snacks, and even some cameras so that they could take pictures along the way. Once they arrived in Boquete, well, it was pretty much onward from there, but Chris and Lisanne were ready. They had prepared, and they were ready for this hiking challenge. But were they going to be ready for an unforeseen challenge of darkness that was lying ahead of them? The hike was something unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It was really hot, it was beautiful, it was tropical, and it was really the perfect time to go sightseeing like this during the springtime that they chose to do this. And before they knew it, well, the day it got ahead of them. They had been hiking for about 2.5 hours at this point, but the sun was starting to set on them. They had stopped a few different times, just observing the surroundings, taking in the beautiful moments together. It genuinely felt like a new era for them, and to commemorate just what they were seeing, this beautiful scenery of this mountain range in front of their very eyes, they wanted to commemorate this, and to do that, they started taking these pictures continuously, on and on for a couple of hours. Before you knew it, time was passing rapidly. As the nighttime was pretty much engulfing them, they were not expecting the darkness that was lurking and waiting for them. But other people did realize this, because their hotel realized that these two ladies, Chris and Lisanne, never made it back to their hotel for that night. In fact, they were never really even known to finish their hike that night. And the next day, they still hadn't shown up. April 2nd, they started the hike on April 1st, and they missed an appointment that they had originally scheduled with a local tour guide. This guide would end up going to report this. Hey, these ladies didn't show up for their appointment. What's happening? And they still didn't know where they were. Nobody, not the hotel, not the tour guide, not even anybody that they might have passed by on their way to this hiking trail. And even both of their parents were starting to panic now because they couldn't get a hold of them. Their parents were regularly messaging them, keeping tabs on where they were, how they were doing. The excitement of the adventure. They wanted to know. There was not even really a ringtone, a dial tone. Their texts weren't going through. Their parents had tried calling them multiple times over the course of that day and a half. And when they realized, well, the local tour guide reported them missing, now the hotel hasn't seen them where they were staying, they were really starting to get worried, as it was multiple days that were passing now. But these ladies were in a foreign part of the world. They had planned this trip for months, and they were going there for specific reasons, like going on this major hike and volunteering. They weren't just messing around, and they didn't just go there to be rebellious. So why would they not be answering anybody? Why were they now missing? After about 4 days had passed, and Lisanne and Chris had not gotten back to their parents, no communication whatsoever, well, their parents weren't just going to keep on sitting back and waiting for them to hear something from them. They were now going to take matters into their own hands. And on April 6th, they would go on a plane all the way to Panama to see what's happening. And during those 4 days, and once Chris and Lizanne's parents had taken off deciding to go see this for their very eyes, well, word had already spread around about these missing girls 5,000 miles away from their home in the Netherlands, and so the Netherlands officials started to get involved. So by the time their parents had traveled all the way to El Pianista, this major hiking trail on this volcanic mountain range that the girls had set off for, so did the Dutch officials. They followed them there. And now it was the Dutch officials and the local Panama officials, everybody including their parents, were all now doing this widespread search for these girls. It was a horrific situation. After all, they were in foreign territory, and for missing people, if this gets out, if the word spreads even to the news, it becomes a national topic of conversation, and their parents especially were not ready for what they were going to soon find out. The entire search lasted for weeks. The entire Dutch district officials and the local Panama district officials were coming together and scouring this hiking trail that these girls were supposed to be on for a 4-hour journey, but nobody could find anything. Nobody found these girls, and after those weeks had passed, they stopped the search. It wasn't until 8 weeks, a whole 2 months after the search had stopped, that a local woman in Panama was doing the same hiking trail on El Pianista, this volcanic mountain range, when she stumbled upon something. A blue backpack that belonged to Lizanne, which still had her supplies in it. The backpack was found washed up near an area called Alto Romero, which is 26 miles. A whole marathon's distance from anywhere near where Chris and Lizanne were supposed to be on their hiking trip that day. That local woman that found the blue backpack told investigators that she'd seen it on the shoreline of the Culebra River, and inside was some cash, a water bottle, 2 phones, and one of those cameras, but still, nowhere near were Chris and Lizanne. Well, after that local woman had found Lizanne's blue backpack near this river, and she took it to investigators, they decided to open up this entire search once again, and instead of searching where they had originally searched by the trail, they would now instead search by this area where the woman found the backpack 26 miles away. But this time around, as the investigators were going to look in this new area, they were about to find some very particular sets of items that would give them a glimpse into the deadly encounters of the situations that Chris and Lizanne found themselves in that night. One of those things that they found in their search was a pair of denim shorts that were sitting on top of a rock, very neatly folded and placed on this rock in a very particular manner, and that was a few feet away from where the local woman found the blue backpack. And once the investigators did some DNA testing, they found those shorts to be Chris's. One of those phones was a Samsung Galaxy S3, which, after trying to decrypt its data, the investigators found it to be Lizanne's phone, which they also figured to have lost battery and wasn't switched back on again on April 6th, the same day that their parents got to the area. Might have their parents missed them by just a few minutes? And something even more bizarre, when they were working on the iPhone 4 that belonged to Chris, is that that phone was actually switched on and off multiple times between April 5th and April 11th. Not only that, but when it was switched on, the data showed that the code to unlock it was typed in multiple times. Almost like somebody was trying to get into it, but didn't know the password. So does that mean that Chris was turning her iPhone on and off again and trying to conserve its battery life and just couldn't get in the phone, forgot her password maybe? Or did someone find Lizanne's backpack, started rifling through it, and tried to get in the phone themselves? The only thing that is for certain is that in this area, there was no signal whatsoever. So these girls couldn't have texted nor called their parents regardless of what time it was or their parents trying to reach them. But one of the most eerie things about this is that they did try and dial some certain specific numbers, but not their parents, not the guide. They tried to dial emergency services numbers, 112, which is one of the international phone numbers for emergency services in that area, and 911 on both phones, but neither phone was able to get through. And sadly, this really odd clue that these girls were in danger by calling the emergency services, that was just the tip of the iceberg of evidence that these investigators were finding. When they were checking the memory card of the cameras that these girls took separately, what they found was a bunch of random photos of the area. Photos that they would take along their journey, smiling and happy, but also photos of their things just scattered everywhere. And it was kind of odd. The pictures looked like it wasn't the girls that were taking these pictures. These pictures on the camera's memory card were taken between 1 and 4 in the morning. So unless these girls had hiked all night and stayed awake throughout the entire night afterwards, well, someone else was taking these pictures, rifling through their stuff, and they were still lurking in the wilderness. These girls were definitely not okay. Whoever had these things in possession after these girls went missing had also something to do with what happened to them. And as investigators were still scouring the area on foot, one of these investigators practically tripped over another piece of evidence. This investigator tripped literally over human remains. They were chunks scattered across the trail. The human remains were found to be a pelvic bone and a boot, and the boot still had a human foot inside of it. And upon DNA testing, the investigators found those human remains to belong to Chris and Lizanne, but they never found the rest of their bodies, and they never found the cause of death as a result. A detective out of Amsterdam at the time, which is where Chris and Lizanne took their flight from to Panama, named Dick Steffens, determined that Chris, along this hiking journey, might have been kidnapped by a sex trafficker, and he also said, a part of his reportings, that the Panama police probably botched the investigation and swept it under the rug. What do you think happened to Chris and Lizanne? Were they murdered?